Good evening. Late here, but not so late that I can't make a little bit of time to just kind of explain what was going through my head today. People are making so much of a racket and fuss about exceptions. Instead of the efforts being aimed towards adhering to a consistent standard or goal, everything is geared towards exceptions. Well, this doesn't apply to me, that doesn't apply to me. Oh, I shouldn't have to do this, or I shouldn't have to do that. Doesn't matter why there was a good reason to do a particular thing or not do a particular thing. For me, it's different. It's not the same. There should be an exception for me. And it shows up everywhere. I'm finding more and more that that's the trend. That whenever I run into a phenomenon, it's everywhere. It doesn't show up in just one aspect of my life. It shows up everywhere. And this one's no exception, paradoxically enough. For example, at work, we have process documents that say, under certain circumstances, do X, Y, and Z. But because people don't like that, they're like, well, it doesn't really tell us that. You're having to interpret the document in order to get it to say that. It doesn't really say that explicitly. And what's amusing is that these are the same kinds of folks who, under different circumstances, have attempted to claim that they are adhering to document, that they are subject matter experts on such things. But it seems it's only when it's convenient to be a subject matter expert, and only when the process really does what they want it to do they abide by it. Otherwise, they find ways to skirt around it, to circumvent it. It's the same thing with faith and doctrine and theology. Everybody wants to be the exception. Oh, well, God might have had that rule set up for other people, but not for me. I've been having discussions with my wife recently about prophecy and the role that it plays in the modern church. And one of the important things to remember is that prophecy was not just about telling the future, as if you were a fortune teller or something like that. Prophecy was as much, if not more, about reaffirming what God has already said than it was about what was going to come next. Because time and again, what comes next is irrelevant. What comes next isn't what matters most, because we already have what we need. We've already been given the commands from God that are most appropriate for us on a day-to-day basis. In ancient Israel, there were long lists of rules and rituals and so forth that they had to follow. In modern-day Christianity, where Christ has already satisfied the letter and intent of those, we are given a different set of instructions. It's a shorter list. It's much more oriented towards heart condition than it is on behavior modification. But that's still not enough for some folks. That's still too strict, too rigid, too stifling. And so there have to be exceptions. There has to be a good reason why they've got spirits visiting them and filling their head with lies and deceit. It can't be evil spirits trying to distract and deceive. It has to have been from God. There has to be an exception for them. These visions, these prophecies of what they think the future will hold, that can't be bad, it can't be wrong, let alone sharing it on the internet without any sort of time spent judging it, discerning whether such prophecies and visions came from God or if they are demonic in origin. Just like with work, it's not about what the text says. It's not about the rules that were set up for us by those who came prior, by those who knew better. It's all about us. It's amazing. There's this default presumption that if there's something there that doesn't seem obvious, there's a gap. And there must be something wrong. Somebody before us didn't account for it. But then afterwards, once we've implemented a whole new system to try and cover the gap, only then do we seem to realize that the solution was already there and we just didn't see it. We didn't want to see it, or our pride wouldn't let us make that jump to put the two pieces together the way that they were supposed to. The way that people who had the best intentions in mind would naturally have seen the thought process flow out. But because we're busy looking for exceptions, for excuses, for reasons to just do what we want and not have to worry about the consequences, we're not going to see that. We're not going to connect the dots the way that they should be connected. And then we're going to complain. We're going to demand that we need an exception. And time is wasted on it. So much time. Time spent trying to figure out, how do we bend the rule? How do we twist the scripture? How do we manipulate the relationship to get just what we want? And then we're no happier at the end. On the other side of all of our schemes, there's no more happiness than what we had before. And now we've got a new system that we put in place. And now all of a sudden we can't blame somebody else. We can't offload the responsibility to the short-sightedness of somebody that came before us. Now we're the ones that own it. We're the ones that put it in place. And the same pride that prevented us from understanding why things were the way they were before we went and messed them up, that same pride prevents us from being able to take criticism well, from understanding how we've made it no better, and in many cases, if not all, have only made things worse. But we're committed. We thought this was going to be better, and we're not going to admit that we were wrong. We were the exception. We were the ones that knew better. It's so sad. It's so disheartening. And I understand why people often think humility is just self-deprecation. Because if where you start out is sitting on the throne of your own fate, master of your own destiny, anything less than that's going to feel like you've just destroyed who you really are. That you've just insulted and degraded yourself. But the reality is that we're just being put back in the place we belong. We're not supposed to be in that position in life. That's not what God created us for, to be independent, to be exceptions. We were part of something bigger than ourselves. We were created with a purpose in mind, with a role to live out. And the more we fight against that, the more we try to work around that inevitable truth that even the most hard-hearted will eventually have to face, the worse it gets. We don't find happiness, again, as we put these systems of circumvention in place. We don't find peace of mind when we do it our way, when we're learning the hard way. So, if you want to break the trend, if you want to be different, stop trying to be an exception, and instead look to the scriptures and obey what God has asked of us. Because that's where we're at now in the relationship with God. It's a free gift, this salvation that we have through Jesus Christ. It's an offer. Now, sure, there are terrible consequences for those that refuse, but it's ultimately a choice. It wasn't our work that afforded that choice. It isn't our work that sustains us in that choice to help us make it. But if our legs are broken and we need a wheelchair, the wheelchair doesn't make us get from one side of the room to the other. We're still responsible for the choice to get in the wheelchair, to let someone push us, or just rot in bed. Don't choose to rot. Don't choose to test fate to see if you really are the exception. The exception was Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the one who lived a perfect life, the one and only who did not fall short of the glory of God. And he sacrificed his life so that all of us who are trying to be exceptions, once we've fallen down enough and instead of trying to just get back up on our own strength, we cry out to God for help, that we can have reconciliation. That instead of our sin and his nostrils filled with our stink, God instead sees Jesus Christ. He sees the sacrifice of the God-man, the one who lived a perfect life, the one who chose to die so that we could live. Let us worship the Messiah, the one who loved us so much as to give us an opportunity we did not deserve, an opportunity that we should not have been given. Because we can never give anything back of value or worth at this point. We've ruined it too much. But that's not the point. God already has everything he needs. It's about what he delights in. And he delights in the blessing of his children, in the relationship with his children, in knowing them and being known by them. Stop trying to be an exception and follow Christ. Be one of the flock that follows the Good Shepherd. Take care. Good night.